Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. This is a clinically pressed, approved CEU podcast. Find the quiz to gain credit at clinicallypressed.org/courses. Clinically Pressed Company, making the complicated simple through results that give back. Find out more at clinicallypressed.org. Let's get started. Welcome back to The Bone, broadcasting via Podavision. I don't know if that's a thing, but we're doing it. I'm Randy Daly. I'm here with ATC, Shelby Daly. It's really her show, but I help her out. And today we've got a special guest. It is Sara. She's an athletic trainer with a PhD in mind-body medicine with a research focus in stress management. She's at Westminster. That sounds very upscale there. Westminster University. She's a program director of free ski and snowboard collegiate athletic teams. Oh my God, your coolness factor just went through the roof. Created and designed an interprofessional education program for medical students at Noorda College. Did I get that name right?
Correct, yeah.
Outstanding. Wow. PhD, mind and body. Westminster. Do you have to wear a lot of tweed at a place called Westminster?
No, actually, we're liberal arts school, so it's a lot of whatever you want to wear. And I don't think I've ever seen tweed, actually.
So
Yeah.
a lot of what you want to wear, and you're doing snowboard and free ski. I can imagine there's a lot of knitwear going through that school.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot.
All right, cool deal. So tell us a little bit, Sara, Shelby, how did you guys end up getting to know each other?
Well, Sara reached out to me on LinkedIn. She had seen a bunch of my posts and was very interested. And she told me that she's done a TED Talk, and I was super interested. And that's how we ended up here.
Outstanding. I saw the TED Talk. I actually watched that to prepare for today.
Thank you.
Good job. I think
much.
you did some. You got a little coaching on that, didn't you?
There's a lot of coaching in TEDx talks. Yeah, I was not expecting that. Actually, when everybody asked, what were you most surprised by, or what were you not expecting with the TEDx talk process, and it was that I did not understand going into it how much memorization and choreography and coaching there is. I mean, I have taught for a very long time. I've been a professor, a workshop, teacher, taught at conference or spoken at conferences, all sorts of things. I can talk on pretty much any stage, I feel like. And so I thought that a TEDx talk would be a natural next step and a great opportunity for this topic. And I did not know what I was getting into, but it's literally very scripted. It's, my friends and definitely my husband knew when I had to move to a different spot on the dot and when my arm would go up and when I would gesture, because everything is choreographed and memorized.
Well, and that was the one give. You did a really, really good job. But I was like, that is not how this woman normally moves. She would not have moved from that side of the dot to that side. I think that was an engineered move.
Yeah. Well, I can just imagine your husband in the crowd doing it with you like a dance mom.
Yep, he was. There was one spot where I paused, and my mom that was sitting next to my husband for the show, she said, he started reciting your next line before you did. Almost like he was giving it to me.
Well, there you go. Well, it's good to have a support network. That's absolutely true. So what's your favorite thing about what you do as an AT?
So as an athletic trainer, somebody asked me this a while ago, actually. They said, what are you most proud of in your career? And in terms of being an athletic trainer as a whole, I would say it's the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
When I think back of, I've been doing this over 20 years, almost 25 years. And since I was certified, which I don't feel like I'm that old, but it's the relationships, I've since transitioned out of full-time athletic training. but I still, I'm still friends with these people. And I remember I used to always tell them, we can be real friends when you graduate. That was always my rule. We can be real friends after you graduate. And not only were we friends, like professional friends while we were all together, but those relationships, a lot of them have held on, and those are really meaningful.
Outstanding. And Shelby, what do you look forward to as an AT every day?
I mean, the relationships are great. I mean, you obviously get the weird kids that you have to deal with.
I'm
Yeah.
sitting right here. Come on, man.
But I mean, you get to see the whole spectrum of somebody's human experience. I feel like as an athletic trainer through their athletic career, you see them at their best and you see them at their worst, and you have to be kind of the rock there to help them through every situation sometimes. So it's a cool way to see life through other people's lenses sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So going back to the TED Talk, that's you guys. It's I don't even know how to actually broach a subject as deep as what you did a TED Talk on. So I mean, all the praise and all the applause goes to you because you took on a very, very difficult subject matter, which is the death of athletes, which we all think, oh, athletic trainers, if we're doing our job right, that is something we're never going to have to deal with. But it happens, and in your case, it actually happened. It wasn't from an impact injury or something that we would kind of, hey, this is how something like that would happen in sports. The experiences that brought you to this point were one was a coach and one was an athlete, but it wasn't on the field that this happened, correct?
My athlete was during a game.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
So
right. It was the hockey puck, right?
Yeah, he died during a game, got hit with the puck, had commotio cordis, and we weren't able to turn it around. So yeah, we did lose him during a game, and then 2 years later, our coach was murdered. So within 2 years, we had two with pretty much the exact same team, and we learned a lot.
Well, and so one of the things that happens today is we're really kind of insulated from that aspect of life. I mean, if we went back 100 years, mom and dad would have 12 kids because they knew 3 of them weren't going to make it off the farm, and so it was just a fact of life. And then when it was time for dinner, your favorite chicken was maybe not going to. Well, pardon me, they would make the cut, I guess, is the deal. And so it was a much different relationship that we had with death. Do you think that we're maybe too insulated from it now, and that's why we're not prepared for it?
I would actually argue that with social media and digital news, I think we hear about it a lot more often. And so I would argue that in that way we are less insulated because we hear about it more. I do think where we are not prepared for it is that we all think it's not going to happen to us. These are other stories, these are other teams, these are other organizations. It's never going to happen to us. And the reality is that, statistics will tell us it's going to happen. Like whether it's in athletics or whether it's removed from athletics, whether it's, car wrecks, medical issues that are not related to athletics, recreational accidents, suicide, we statistically will all experience this. And whether it's our athletic team, it might be a team at school, a team at work, family, there's teams all over the place. Obviously, I chose to share our experience as an athletic team, and this is an athletic training podcast, but there's teams all over, right? And so I think that where we fail to be prepared is we think it's not going to happen to us. And then I also think that in the athletic training space, we are prepared for these with emergency action plans, but we really focus on the medical response and on the communication in the moment. And I have yet to see in any of the organizations that I've worked with, I have yet to see an emergency action plan that extends into grieving and healing and the communication beyond just the emergency notifications. And so I think that's where it's really important to set ourselves up well to grieve and heal instead of just simply who's going to provide CPR and what are we going to do until emergency medical personnel get there. This experience goes far beyond that.
All right. So you said that, just law of large numbers, we're all going to run into this at some point and have to deal with it. What are the actual numbers when it comes to experience?
And it's hard to nail this down because there isn't a lot of research. There is a database that was keeping track. I personally feel it is very under reported. But the one number that really stood out to me, and this is an old statistic because it's hard to get new ones. It's so hard to gather this. But between the database shows that between the years 2000, so this is a long time ago, 2000 and 2018, which is already a long time ago. But between those years, there were over 2,200 athletic deaths, specifically from athletics. And that's just in youth under the age of 18. So when we take that into account, that it's a small demographic, not a small demographic, but it's eliminating, professional, collegiate, and then also adult recreational athletes from that number. And the fact that it's only athletics and it's only what's reported, I think that that's a very low number in regards to what we are actually going to experience.
Now, before we get a whole bunch of negative feedback from listeners and people watching about the guy giggling about death, the number of deaths, it was more the statement on the year. Because I spent most of my life living with a year that started with 19, and then you said 20 is a long time ago. I was like, oh my God, you young chickadee. Oh my goodness.
Yes, but it feels, I agree with you because I was also born in the 19s. But but when you say 2000 and you realize that was 24 and a half years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a quarter century.
And a lot of the people listening to the podcast, it'll be probably 25 or more years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah, like quarter century. It's a lot of years that go by. What about we look at the big teams like the NFL, and it seems like with the NFL, it took a movie. I think it was a Will Smith movie before anybody really started having a big conversation about concussions and injuries and the deaths of sort that came from the compression injuries. What do we see as, now that we have maybe a higher level of awareness? Obviously you do. That movie brought a lot of light to the subject. What do you see that's happening with prevention and preventative conditions to try and keep athletes from harm?
I mean, I think we're doing a lot to prevent these big injuries, right? And this is what athletic trainers do. This is what we're good at. We do the prevention, we do the screenings, we do pre-participation physicals. I mentioned in my TED Talk that there was a big decrease in cardiac-related deaths around the year 2018. That was when it was really big to push, cardiac screenings in sports physicals. That's when those really got added to the rate that they are now. And so I think that athletic trainers are doing a lot to prevent as much as we can. And obviously the science is leading that, right? The science and the research is guiding that. I think one of the things we need to mention and definitely pay attention to is that different levels of athletics are going to have different levels of ability to prevent and then also have these big emergency action plans in place. Right. And so a lot of the times you might talk to a parent, and I've done this quite often, where I talk to a parent and their kid plays like little league football. And they say, well, we don't have an athletic trainer on site. We don't have someone that oversees all of that. It's our coach and it's EMS. And one of the things that we discuss is figuring out ways to have an athletic trainer on site, even if they're covering multiple teams and multiple fields, but having someone there that can oversee all of this. So that they're not just waiting for EMS and parents and coaches are dealing with it until then. And then I also think that there's a really big piece of educating everybody that we work with, making sure that coaches are prepared. They're the ones that are usually there even more frontline than athletic trainers, which is hard to believe sometimes because athletic trainers are like the front line. But coaches are there even more often. And so having them prepared, having them able to administer CPR if they need to, know when to call EMS so they're not just blowing up the athletic trainer's phone, who then eventually says call EMS. So it's important to have everybody educated, have parents understand why it's so important. I think that the higher we get in athletics, the more we creep towards collegiate or professional athletics, those organizations know the importance, right? And they have the means to have a team available. The ones I really worry about in terms of emergency preparedness, and I'm not even talking about grieving and healing yet, is our younger ones that don't have a full-time athletic trainer on site. How do we help them? And how do we help them understand the importance of that?
So what I'm kind of hearing here is I'm trying to think way back to when I actually went to a coaching school. So you have, especially at the young ages, a whole bunch of folks who are not professionals who are doing the coaching. And one of the things that I remember not learning about when I was learning to be a soccer coach was there was no discussion of injury. There was no discussion of immediate action plans. I mean, there was, if you were a gifted coach, it was, I actually thought I hadn't brought some ice, but no bags. So just stick your knee in the cooler and we'll call it good. So do you see that maybe one of the places that we need to address that is maybe reaching out to some of these folks who publish the books and the videotapes and different things and say, hey, man, you might want to put a segment in on here's some immediate action plans, or here's some things that you might want to have to be ready for this. Because as we're seeing, as we push these kids, we always think of athletes, and I'm going to quote you here, athletes are seen as the epitome of health, which makes death especially shocking. And then, of course, we're all vulnerable. So to get from where we're at to hopefully not have to spend as much time with having to deal with a death, what have we worked on those steps yet?
I think it's starting to happen. I work alongside a lot of coaches that do work in youth athletics, and the nice thing is a lot of them come from the college athletics model, whether they're an athlete themselves or they've coached at college athletics and now go back to run these youth organizations. And so they're used to having athletic trainers, and they know what athletic trainers do, and they know how it can be run. Mm-hmm. And when they realize that all that liability is coming onto their shoulders, they don't want it. They do not want it. And so oftentimes they're reaching out saying, how do we hire athletic trainers to be at our events? How do we, how do we get this coverage? How do we make sure that it's not on our heads? And I think that big kind of push of information that's coming from people that have experienced having athletic trainers, and then now they realize that they don't want to be without. And so that is starting to make a big shift. Also, the more that parents are starting to be educated about these things, they are also asking. I, work a hockey showcase every summer. And one of the things I talk to a lot of parents about is when you are choosing a team for your athlete to go to, are you asking them what their medical team looks like? And the more that we are becoming aware of these injuries and what can happen, parents are asking the hard questions. They want to know that their kids are going to be taken care of. And so we're getting the knowledge from the one side of those that have been in collegiate athletics and know what athletic trainers can do versus coaches or parents that are asking, hey, how are you going to take care of my kids? And the solution, as we all know, is athletic trainers. And then there's companies that are starting to hire PRN athletic trainers and things like that. And so we're starting to do it, but it's a movement that's going to take time, but it's happening. I see it happening.
All right. So we're starting to come to the realization that it's a real risk. And I think we're today seeing even more variables that are feeding into that. It's not just the athleticism. It's not just what's going on. I was a dad of a kid who almost died in an athletic related situation because of an underlying health issue that I had no idea about. And the reason it came forward was because of the athletic activity. So we're starting to be more aware of it. We're starting to prepare for it a little bit more. Everything goes wrong. Somebody dies. What do we do then?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that can and will happen after the death of a teammate. There's going to be a lot of grieving and then eventually healing that has to happen. The grieving is going to be really widespread. It's obviously going to be all of the teammates, including staff, but it goes beyond that also into community, obviously the family of the athlete, and then onto the fans as well. Like everybody knows this athlete and everybody's going to grieve that. And the thing that's important to remember is that everybody's going to grieve individually. Everybody's going to have a different way of doing this. They're going to grieve at different rates, times, in different ways. Some people may need to take time away and need to be by themselves, and other people may want to only be with the team, and never be alone. Some people may choose different ways to always remember their teammate, and other.
Continue.
I figured. So the biggest thing is just to remember that everybody's going to grieve in individual ways, right? And to facilitate that. I remember after Jackson died, he was my hockey athlete, and we made a really big point to make sure that almost any suggestion on how to grieve him, we did it. Whether it was a banner in the rafters, whether it was a picture and a phrase by our locker room door that they all touched on the way out, a moment of silence, a black patch on our jerseys, a memorial outside the rink. We did all of them. And because we didn't want anybody to feel like their idea wasn't worthy, of grieving when somebody else's was. And so it was really important to us to do that. I also watched our teammates grieve at different rates and in different ways in terms of who they wanted to be around. Some people wanted to be with the team constantly and wanted to practice the next day. Some people needed that physical athlete or physical expression, but other people just wanted to be around each other. And then other athletes needed time away. I just needed time to myself. I need time with my family, and they didn't. But that, I will say, that was few and far between. Most people just wanted to be together with the team. I speak a lot in my TED Talk about how athletic teams are very tight-knit groups. And one of the things that we like to go to very quickly is, we'll bring in grief counselors. The thing about these tight-knit groups is, unless they are already part of that tight-knit family, nobody's going to talk to them. So we hear all the time about these tragedies happening, and then they bring in grief counselors and they sit alone in a room and nobody goes in. It's because we can't imagine that they would know how we're feeling. They're not part of the family. They didn't know Jackson. They didn't know how much we love him. They didn't know what it's like to not have him in the locker room anymore. They don't know. And I think we really get into that tight-knit family group, which can cause a lot of very beautiful things. But it also can limit some of that support unless, and this is one of my really big recommendations, you have to create those relationships before these crises happen. So if you have sports psychologists that you can have, that can already have a relationship with your teams and be involved, if you can have some of these other support systems, even if they're not super, super involved and they're not at every practice, just so that we are familiar with them. I think back to when Jackson died, we had a sports psychologist, and I will say sports psychologists are not, necessarily specialists in grief, but they do have training and they can be a really good facilitator for that. And we had a sports psychologist that we saw like once every 2 weeks during the season. We were a couple months into the season when Jackson died. So at that point, we had seen Ben half a dozen times, and he was welcome into that inner circle while we were grieving because we knew him. He had already been there with us. He was part of our group. He was part of our family, part of our team. But yet if he would have been a stranger at that point, I can guarantee you nobody would have talked to him. That happened with Ken. The school wanted to send over grief counselors. No one talked to him. And so that's one of the recommendations I make, is to have those relationships in place beforehand. The other thing I really want to point out to afterwards when we talk about individual grieving is that staff often grieves last. I mentioned this in my TED Talk as well. As staff, whether it be coaches, athletic trainers, team managers, our front desk staff, or front office staff, any of those type of people, we take it upon ourselves to take care of this team, right? And so the first thing on our minds is usually to make sure all the athletes are okay. And even though we are still grieving, we usually put it on the back burner and we try to take care of our team. And then what happens is the season doesn't stop. Games and practices continue to happen. Athletes start to feel better. And right when we start to feel like everybody else is doing okay, we still haven't grieved this. We're still struggling. And it can be hard sometimes to recognize I'm still struggling and then ask for help when you feel like everybody else has moved on. And you don't want to bring people down, and you don't want to be the wet blanket. But it's so important to focus on our own grieving whenever we need to, whenever we can. And I encourage others, please check in with your coaches and staff, because they will be delayed in that grieving process. And they often get a little bit forgotten as things start to move forward again.
Well, I think that's where it's interesting with the NCAA mental health regulations that are being put into place, is how it's actually going to integrate nicely into established athletic training departments already. As you mentioned, like, they have to be involved before an incident happens, where I think some people are going to cut the corners and just have someone available that may come and introduce themselves once or twice, but is anybody actually going to utilize that? I mean, at most college campuses, the school side has counselors, and I know when we try to refer athletes, not necessarily for death, but even other things going on, they're very resistant to take advantage of those resources. So it's going to be a very interesting evolution of how do we get these people involved. And they're already very busy, to be honest, because I mean, I would assume most sessions are going to be 30 minutes to an hour, which there's only maybe 8 to 10 hours of the day that they're going to be there for. So how are they actually going to provide a robust resource if their time is technically so limited?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think it's important to recognize that there is still a stigma there, right? Of going and talking with counselors about mental health, as much as we are trying to change that stigma, and it is shifting. It's still there in a lot of realms. And also, I think it's important to recognize that there may be some element of an athlete not wanting their coaches to know that there's this thing happening for them, or not wanting their other teammates to know. Which goes back to psychological safety, which I think we should talk about in a minute. But one thing that I would recommend is, when you do have access to these professionals, bring them in for team sessions if you can. That's what we did with our teams, and it was really beneficial, because then you get FaceTime with everyone. And it doesn't have to be, hard conversations. It can be guided imagery. It can be, it can be teaching coping skills. It can be activities, just to have some sort of interaction with these individuals, so they know them, they know their faces, they know their names, how to find them, and that they're not strangers when this happens, right?
So what would be the traditional process? I mean, you're bringing a new level of awareness and making some recommendations about what should have done. What was happening, and where do you see that changing? What do you tell us the history?
What has happened in terms of preparation?
Well, so what used to happen, and then what are you seeing as what needs to happen? How about that?
Yeah, in terms of preparation, or in terms of like grieving, or all of it?
You know so much more than I do.
Yeah.
You tell me what I need to know.
So I think in the past, things like this would happen, and then we would kind of scramble to figure it out. And honestly, that's where we were at when Jackson died. We scrambled. I know that me and the head coach and the team manager, we didn't sleep hardly any for like 48 hours. We were picking up his family from the airport. We were, the general manager was putting together press releases, and, we were just scrambling because we were figuring it out as we went. This was also, to age myself, this was a time before social media, really before a lot of the internet in terms of what it is now. You can just Google something like you do now. And in the past, we would do the best we could. And a lot of that was like sending in grief counselors. And it was just asking people like, well, what do you need? Until I have been working with organizations, I haven't seen anyone preparing for this. Where now, when I meet with these organizations, I look at the sports information director and I said, how easy would it be for you to pull information on an athlete in less than 30 minutes to get it to press? They're going to want pictures, hometown. They're going to want film of them playing. They're going to want like who they are. Do they like to fish? Do they like to cook? Like, who are these people, right? They're going to want to know these things. And can you pull that information in 30 minutes? And the other thing I talk about as well is social media is out there. They're going to pull straight from your social media what you already have up. But then also if an emergency happens at a game or something like that, or maybe even, I would think not at a practice with teammates, but more at a game, you might have people filming from the crowd. And it's going to be out on social media before you're even able to realize it's out there. And so preparing in that way is also important. And these are things that a lot of times we don't include in emergency action plans, right? We're not ready for this side of it. So it's like once that ambulance drives off, okay, now what? Because now there's a whole beast that starts rolling. And at the same time, everybody's sad, hurt, and you still have to function through all this.
Now, so on the emotional side of it, and looking for ways to produce or put plans into place for the psychological support, is the NCAA mental health regulations, does that help, or is that behind the power curve, or they were kind of where they need to be?
I think it's going to increase access, and Shelby, I would be interested to hear your thoughts as well. I think it's going to increase access, but I think the big hurdle we're still going to have to get over is anyone actually going to utilize the resource?
Yeah. I just talked to a sports psychologist about it a little bit, and that should be dropping before this episode. But, I was asking about cost ultimately. Like, if we're already struggling to get enough athletic trainers to cover, however many events, looking at the financials, obviously the schools have made it somewhat important to have athletics at their school. But are they actually doing the financials to provide proper coverage also medically, psychologically, whatever strength and conditioning technically should be in that too. So I'm just wondering, like I had mentioned before, yeah, these regulations are going to come in, but how are some schools going to cut the corners? And is it really going to help? Is it going to make it worse? I don't know. I don't think many schools are going to be able to hire a full-time person to manage these situations for the teams and be available, like you said, before something happens. And I don't know, it's probably going to be kind of a retainer thing ultimately is, oh yeah, we're just partnered with a company or an office off campus. We can send people as needed, but they never step foot on campus or make themselves known. So that's where I'm seeing the bigger hurdles is the implementation. Yeah, we can regulate things as much as we want, but is it really going to work out at the end?
Yeah.
Well, and I guess the other piece here is, there's this expansion of what athletic trainers do. And so that's good for athletic trainers as an industry and as professionals. But this is like that one more paper thin mint that we're going to stick on top of everything else we're doing. Wow. What else would you like the ATCs to do, I guess, is kind of and how do you, if you are going to have that vast range of responsibility, how do you properly motivate and compensate AT professionals to provide that range of service?
Compensation is a whole different topic that I don't even think we can get into in the time we have allotted here. But I will say, when you talk about adding it onto the responsibility, I'm going to say in my experience, it's always been our responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
The athletic trainers are who people go to when they need help. Whether it's that they need scissors and it has nothing to do with medical anything, whether they need a snack, a hug, or a sprained ankle, they're coming to their athletic trainer. And I see Shelby laughing because it's true, right? Like I had athletes come to me with all sorts of things that weren't even necessarily athletics related. And so when they need help or they don't know what to do, it always comes down to the athletic trainer anyways. I remember turning over a roll of Luco tape so our bus driver could fix something in the engine and get us home one night. It's kind of what happens anyways. And so I think having these conversations are only going to help athletic trainers because this is coming onto our shoulders regardless. They're coming to us saying, what do we do? Okay, we just sent that ambulance off. It was us already, by the way. And now they look at us and say, what do we do? And they may not say it in those words, but they're looking to us for answers. The rest of the team wants to know, is our teammate going to be okay? What just happened? Am I going to be okay if I keep playing? Our coach wants to know, is my athlete going to be okay? Are my teams going to be okay? I remember my coach looked at me and said, should we play our game tomorrow? He wanted me to make that decision. Now, I don't know if he really truly wanted me to make the decision, but he wanted my input, obviously. Or he was at least vocalizing what was going through his head, right? And so these are the things that I think we need to I know we need to already think about. And as athletic trainers, we already have that voice of preparing emergency action plans, and we need to make a plan for grieving and healing as well.
Now, you said something I think was fairly important there is you are the professional that everybody comes to. I mean, the coach can ignore your recommendations all through everything else right up until something like this happens. And then it happens and the coach is still coming to you for help. The parents are coming to you for help, the other athletes. And you said that the ATCs and the coaches quite often have to wait to actually go through their grief process. So what are some of the things that can support the athletic trainers post-trauma because they don't get to deal with it on the same timeline as everybody else?
Yeah, so really big ones are going to be one, just acknowledging it, that you're grieving and it's okay to be grieving, and that you're going to grieve individually just like anyone else, not only due to your personality and your background, but also that you have a unique relationship with this athlete. Like the athletic trainer-athlete relationship is like no other relationship. And so you are going to grieve differently. I remember my sports psychologist looked at me weeks after Jackson died, and I was still really struggling. And he told me, he said, grief is in relation to love. And I know you really cared about him, and so you're going to grieve hard. And it's almost like it gave me permission, because I loved him so much, because he meant so much to me, that I could still be grieving this way. And so it's important to remember that we can and will grieve that way, and also just acknowledge it. I would also encourage our athletic trainers to look for resources. AT's Care is a big one. I remember at the time when Jackson died, I just wanted to talk to another athletic trainer that had been through it. I was a young athletic trainer. I was 3 years into my career post-certification. And I so badly wanted to talk to somebody that had lost an athlete in their hands. I had known multiple athletic trainers that had lost athletes to car wrecks and things outside of athletics, but nobody in their hands. You know, Jackson took his last breath from my lungs, and that's a unique relationship. And I couldn't find anybody. Now, I'm sure I could now on the internet and in social media. And it's part of why I'm so vocal, because I say, like, I'm here. If you ever need to talk, I am here. And I've had a few athletic trainers reach out and say, I need to talk to somebody that's been there. AT's Care is really powerful in that regard, I think, just to connect us to another athletic trainer that gets it. I would say also rely on your mentors and your colleagues. Sometimes we don't want to be a burden, but other people don't see it as burdens. Mm-hmm. They want to be there. They want to support us. They don't know what to do to help us and support us. And so just telling them, hey, I just need to talk through this. Can I just talk to you? I know as an athletic trainer, you get it. And give yourself time to do that. And then I would also say, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. You don't have to be the rock for the team. They know this is hard. They're struggling too. And appropriate vulnerability can be really powerful. Now, does it mean that, show you're struggling all over the place? No. But at times, if you tear up a little bit, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Appropriate vulnerability can give a lot of permissions, can give a lot of space for people to step in and not only support, but also give them permission to grieve as well.
Yeah, I would say everybody grieves at different times, to be honest, and it could be months later. As my dad mentioned, I was the person that almost died from a cardiac incident. That took months for me to process. Ultimately, part of my athletic career was how I identified growing up, and it was gone. So, I mean, this is rolling into a question a little bit. But, me going through the process, I didn't have the support. This was in 2011. Went into basically cardiac arrest, tachycardic arrhythmia situation. And so, had an ICD defibrillator put in the next day and was told that I was never going to play sports again. So I was at home, luckily, was with family, but then had to go back to school for my junior year after that, where had all my collegiate athletic friends, but they were all going into fall season and they were doing their thing. So I was kind of alone. So I did try to do the counseling portion of trying to help myself, but there was just such a disconnect. I hated it because they didn't understand the athletic portion, and then they didn't really have the death portion or near-death experience portion under control. They were kind of helping just academic people with mental health, I guess. Yeah. So I think, looking at those specialists that you're going to bring in, how would somebody vet someone out to make sure that obviously they can create the relationship before something bad happens, but really have the tools afterwards, if you have any advice on that?
Yeah, great question. And I also want to say I'm so glad you're here. And also at the same time, I'm so sorry that you had to experience that. In terms of choosing who you bring in, I would focus first on the athletics piece. If you're working specifically with athletics teams, I would work on someone that fits well with the athletics piece. Mm-hmm. Having someone that fits into the family and gets the athletics piece is going to benefit you in a lot of different ways. And it will also create good, strong relationships that'll benefit the overall group when crises do happen. So I would focus on the athletics piece. If they also have training in grief management, that would be fantastic. Odds are in their schooling, they've probably had a little bit of it. Finding somebody that has a lot of hands-on experience and is still in athletics is probably slim. But mm-hmm. I don't think we necessarily need it because, and I will say, here's the reason why. They can be the liaison, right? They can get through the door, but they can also step outside and get and talk to their mentors and talk to people and say, how do I support this team?
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to have the professional tools and relationships to do that. And they'll be able to coordinate with other people to be able to bring them in if they feel that that's appropriate. Right.
Yeah.
But it's going to be really hard to find someone that has all of that, but they'll be able to relay. And so I would focus on the athletics piece.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't think I need a grief counselor every day at practice.
Right. Right. But they'll also be able to have connections, right? And I think that's part of where, as staff, we can step in too, because, our athletes, very rarely are they looking for external resources. Usually they just kind of want to hunker down with the family, and the family being the team. If they do want to seek external resources, sure, more power to them. Absolutely support it. Fantastic. I have found most just want to be with the team. But as staff, we are usually ourselves looking for resources of how can I gather tools to then support my team? And it's not necessarily that I'm bringing somebody external in, it's that I'm looking for tools.
And then I guess back to the athletic trainers, since we're going to be the last ones coping. If you have a team around you of other athletic trainers, so if I had a coworker who had an athlete that died, obviously everybody copes differently. Some people really want to get involved, some people withdraw. How would it be appropriate to step in and have them go take time? I mean, obviously it's a communication factor ultimately, but as a colleague, how can I better support that athletic trainer to make sure that it's not all on their shoulders, I guess?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's really important to remember that everybody grieves individually, right? And so asking, and this is where it's a fine balance of supporting people in grief, right? Because sometimes asking is an additional burden where they're like, I don't want to make a decision. I don't want to have to identify what I need. And then other times they will be able to give you information that you won't know. So a great way of asking is to give options, right? Is to say, would it feel helpful for me to come assist you at practice? Or would it feel helpful for you to take off tomorrow and I can cover your practice? And let them choose from those two options. I will say in my personal experience, you couldn't have drug me away from my team at that point. I'd already lost one. I had a white knuckle grip on the rest of them, right? Like, and that was a big thing I had to get past, was my anxiety as an athletic trainer. I remember going into games and really having to deal with some anxiety of, what if this happens again? I wasn't going to let them out of my sight. I mean, the rest of them, I was helicopter mom to the nth degree, right, for the rest of the season and beyond. So if somebody would have said, I can cover your practice tomorrow, I would have said, thanks, but no thanks. There's no way. Now, if somebody would have said, hey, can I come help you at practice? And they were literally just a shadow, filling water. Hey, do you want me to take this ankle? No, you got it. Okay. And then step back against the wall just so I knew I wasn't alone. They may have stood there and not done a darn thing for a really long time. And maybe they would. I don't know. But that could be a really great option, right?
Yeah.
And to let them know. I would also say, when we are grieving, it makes it really hard to do the mundane basic things. Feeding ourselves, doing our laundry, cleaning our house, filling our car with gas, right? Like the things that are just so easy I wouldn't say easy, but like kind of the mundane self-care things. So one thing I like to do when I know people are grieving is just tell them, I'd like to have DoorDash delivered to you for dinner. Would you prefer that tomorrow night or Thursday night? Right? And so just asking, like, tell me when I can send dinner. Make it as easy for them as possible to say, like, actually, my sister's doing it tomorrow night. If you could do Thursday, that'd be great.
Yeah,
or maybe
make sure it gets done.
Yeah.
Too.
Or maybe it's you. Yeah. And then always follow through. Definitely don't say you're going to send dinner and then don't. But another thing, like, I know we're all, we're athletic trainers. We're DoorDash, what? Unless you're delivering it to the athletic training room. But maybe it's just as simple as like, hey, I've got lunch for both of us tomorrow. Okay. Just letting you know I'm going to bring in lunch for you two tomorrow. That would make me feel really cared for. Do you see where I'm going with this, of just being able to take some things off of their plate? But while a lot of us go to, I'll cover your teams, I think there's a really large percentage of athletic trainers that's the last thing they would want.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that, you want to grieve with the family. You want to be together. Who else knows how much I love him and how much I care about him than this group? I want to be with them.
Yep.
I remember, I will never forget pulling up to a red light. It was just like 3 or 4 days after Jackson died. And the car next to me, they were singing and the music was blaring, and I got angry. And I remember thinking, how dare you? Don't you know that Jackson just died? Don't you know he's not here anymore?
Yeah, no joy in the world. No joy in the world allowed until we get through this thing.
Well, and I tell that story just to give the example that nobody knows any better than how you're grieving than this tight-knit group that already exists. Yep. And so a lot of the times that's going to be where we want to be at, right? We want to be there.
Yeah. Well, and you said something that was kind of interesting that I liked. You were actually, you slipped into sales mode there for a while because you gave them the A/B close. Hey, you want this or you want that? And you're rightfully so. It makes it easy for them to give you an answer so that they can actually, move on. The other one that came to mind is, so one of the other things we do on the podcast is we read through different books on different subject matters. We were doing one on negotiating. And what kept occurring to me is, okay, this is where you could actually use one of those negotiating techniques, not because you're trying to get something, but what they talk about is that you don't always ask a yes/no question because you want to give them the opportunity. So you say, how are you doing, in an open-ended question, so that if they're ready to talk to you, they can actually come back with an answer instead of, nope, yep, I'm good, nope. So tip of the hat for doing the A/B close. You have a future in sales. And
no,
then, don't want it, take it away, not going there. Okay, fine. But it is kind of cool when you can use those different pieces where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, this is outside of my realm, but I could use that to help my athletes.
Yeah, and I will say the other big thing with supporting athletic trainers is ask and talk about that athlete for months, years. Because we go back to that, they're grieving last, right? They have that delayed grieving. And so even just by asking about the athlete or mentioning it, or even just, pointing out the patch or just taking acknowledging, tells them that it's okay to still talk about that athlete themselves. It's okay to still talk to you about it. And sometimes that is all the meaning, like everything we need in the world is just to know who we can talk to, because we feel like everybody else gets sick of it, right? But we're coming up on the 20-year anniversary of Jackson dying. It's January 21st of 2025 will be the 20-year anniversary. And even now, I will still have friends reach out, or if I make a post that is, that mentions him, and they comment in a personal way, instead of just liking the post, but, mentioning something personal, it gives me permission to still talk about him too.
Well,
and that can be really meaningful.
And that's actually one of all the things that I don't like about social media. One thing that I found was, and I tripped over this, that I appreciate is, so when you get to my station in life, you know more people who have made the transition than you do when you're young, okay? And so social media will send me a birthday reminder about somebody who's passed. And it's like, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday. And so, yeah, it's kind of that nice thing that you can go, oh, man, I remember Trina. She was so cool. And then you get to have that nice thought and that nice memory. And obviously there's still pain because they're gone. But guess how much longer they're living in memory now, because you get some of these little cues. And then, you can talk to somebody else who knew Trina or whoever, and say, hey, man, just thinking about him today. And then you got a shared experience that every other day of the week, the social media is keeping us from being together, because now we're all out on computers and all the emotional cues are gone. But now it actually helps you come together. So of all the things I hate about social media, that was one of the good ones.
Well, in this generation that a lot of us are working with as athletic trainers, they're a social media generation.
Oh, yeah.
So they're going to grieve openly on social media. And they communicate through social media, and they also get educated through social media, and they also get supported through social media. So when we talk about not only preparing for these experiences, social media needs to be part of the conversation. But I think we also we can benefit from using social media in those ways. And I would be shocked if there's a grief that happens without some social media component at this point.
Yeah.
And so I think having guidelines on that, or at least suggestions, are helpful, because there will be a social media component for sure.
So we're coming up to the end of the hour here. Tell us a little bit about trends that you're excited about as an AT.
Oh, I'm excited about a lot of stuff for athletic trainers. I think athletic trainers are really starting to promote ourselves as the frontline, broad spectrum healthcare providers that we are. And I love seeing that. So many different settings. It's like whatever you want to get into, you can. And, I have some colleagues that are doing some really cool stuff. Like, I will say, I know some athletic trainers are doing some really cool stuff. I used to work with a lady. She actually got me into U.S. Taekwondo, and I met her through the X Games. We did a lot of really fun stuff together. And she has now stepped into a new adventure in her career. And a couple weeks ago, I got a text from her. Hadn't heard from her in a while. And she said, hey, I'm coming through town. Want to come watch a show? She's now with the circus.
No.
And
I got to Fairgrounds?
Yes. And I got to sit. Yeah, Trish. And I got to sit on the floor and watch the circus with Trish. So that was super fun. One of my best friends, we did our PhDs together. He's also an athletic trainer. When we were at our residency and all introducing ourselves, and he said he was an athletic trainer, I was like, what? And so we got to be really good friends and clicked and are really close. He's the head of medical for Taylor Swift. And so I love, the news tells me where he's at in the world. I don't even have to touch base with him. I know he was just in Miami and he's on his way to Indianapolis. I know these things. But I love all that. I love seeing, colleagues that are working in physician extender settings that are doing surgical stuff. I love seeing all that. I think one of the big trends that I'm really excited about and really supporting is this. I feel like there's a really big push with this new generation of athletic trainers that are changing the expectations around work-life harmony and how athletic trainers step into that space. And I have been fairly vocal. You know, I was an full-time athletic trainer for a little over 20 years and did collegiate for most of that. And while I loved my career and have a lot of really great memories, it ultimately became unsustainable when it came to work-life harmony. And when I met my husband, a lot of people like to blame my husband, but I thank my husband. Yes, he was the pivotal one there. I met him in my late 30s and for the first time had someone I wanted to be with at home.
Mm-hmm.
You know, until then, my family was at work. But now I had family at home and I wanted to be with him. And I left full-time athletic training the month after we got married. So
see, it's always the guy's fault. We're so needy.
no, I thank him for that because it opened up a lot of opportunities for me. But what I love hearing, though, is that this new generation that's coming in, they're saying, hey, we're not okay working 60 hours a week anymore, and sometimes 80.
Yeah.
And they're starting to, and that's just college. That's D2 college. And so they're being very vocal about it, and they're not taking the jobs. You know, I sit on the board of directors for the Utah Athletic Trainers Association. I think I can share this. We were a couple months ago, we were all talking and somebody was saying, hey, we're hiring for this collegiate position and we have had 0 applicants. Yet our clinical positions are getting quite a few applicants, but people, they want that stability in life. They don't want to go into a 60, 70, 80 hour a week position, and they want the compensation that's there. And I fully support all of this. I think it's going to take us reconfiguring how we do athletic training. I think it's going to take some changes, but I am in full support, and I think it's been long overdue. And I don't think there's a generation that's any better equipped to figure this out than this new generation of athletic trainers.
Well, and sometimes there's parallels between what, you know, athletics and the real world. So one of the things that just happened recently is one of the big banking organizations is potentially going to be sued because one of their young junior bankers, they believe it was a clot that broke loose, but he was working 100 hours a week to get this merger put together. And so, you know, that's the tip of the iceberg. They go, oh my gosh, we had a junior banker working 100 hours a week who died. And this was not a wimpy guy. This is a former special forces guy who went into banking to try and get a little bit more of that life balance and ended up trying to prove himself. And so you see this inflection point, and then they start looking at these organizations as like, oh, so they put in a rule that you can't work over 80 hours a week, but then the managers figured out how to end run that rule that was supposed to be there to help protect people. So I think what may be happening is we're, like you said, with this new generation, they're saying, hey, you know what? There are other things to a well-rounded life, and we need to make sure that we're protecting those. So you may be like on the tip of the tidal wave here. You're like surfing this thing.
No, I think it's happening. Because the people that are coming in, these new athletic trainers, they're not even applying for the jobs that don't fit this new model. And so we're going to have to switch. We're going to have to shift.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, it's going to be a good thing if you know, work is great. I mean, and you did it 20 years, you know, you were there, you were focused, and it was, you know, but ultimately there's other things in life.
Yeah.
Crazy thought.
You can only watch so many sports sometimes.
Say that again.
You can only watch so many sports sometimes.
Yes. And there's really fantastic things in athletic training, but it doesn't mean you need to be there 60, 70, or 80 hours a week.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. All right. So if you were going to define athletic training in 3 words, what would it be? You want me to hum I'll give you one of like the what was it, Jeopardy soundtrack?
Jeopardy.
Do. I'll give you time to think.
I'm gonna cheat here.
Oh, prepared.
And not cheat, but more bend the rules.
Oh,
I always
okay.
say you have to know the rules to know how to bend them. So I'm gonna use hyphenated words, which are
Oh.
real
That's
big in
fine.
medicine, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right.
And I'm gonna say relationship-based,
Mm-hmm.
full spectrum healthcare.
Oh, there we go. You didn't even use Latin. Thank you so much. That's
I did not. Just two
you know,
hyphens.
healthcare. I was worried you're going to go right to the Latin, and then we'd have to have a whole nother.
No, relationship-based, full spectrum healthcare. Just somebody that they can come to and that knows them, that cares about them, that wants to take care of them, and that can help with anything. Whether it's my parents are getting divorced, I have a sore throat, something popped in my knee, whatever it is.
All right.
And
So
I always get the dating advice questions.
Dating advice questions. Yeah,
Well,
that happens.
I can see why, you've got a good looking husband. I can see why women would be like, hey, what was she doing right?
Yeah, the dating advice questions or homework.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I did that.
All right.
Yeah.
So if folks want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Great question. So the best way, I mean, my name is very Googleable. Like it's very unique. So if you,
It's got a hyphen though.
it does, but if you put in Sara Beaudry-Wiltse, like I am the only one. Now, Sara Beaudry, there is a like world championship hoop dancer, like Native American hoop dancer. So that's some pretty cool clout right there.
There you go.
But Sara Beaudry-Wiltse, you can just Google it and find me. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, I'm Facebook. I'm all over the place. The best way is probably my website, drsaramarie.com, drsaramarie.com. That will also come up if you Google me. So,
All right.
thanks
And no
to the-
H in there. It's just SARA, right?
correct.
Outstanding. All right. Well, that's going to do it for To the Bone this time around. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. Doctor, it was a pleasure talking to you, and you're doing some very important things. There's nothing out there that is more mysterious than what happens when somebody moves to the next level. And thank you so much for being empathetic and then sharing what you've learned. All right, that's To the Bone for this week. We'll see you next time. That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It's hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.